Hey there, fellow foodies. This is Dr. Quave. You're listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious. We are now in season 5, and this is my favorite season by far because I've had the chance to invite all the people that I admire to come onto the show. And our guest today is an incredibly special woman who is doing so much to bring knowledge of plants and nature out to the public. Her name is Alexis Nikole Nelson. She is a cook, a forager, and internet personality who has become the master of TikTok with something like 4 million followers. I love watching her videos. My kids love watching her videos. I've learned so much from her. And Alexis, I'm so happy to have you on the show today.
I am so happy to be here. I also have learned so much from you, so that streak goes both ways.
Awesome. Well, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to begin. So this is a food podcast,
Yes.
and we talk a lot about crops. We talk a lot about the future of food, food security, food sovereignty, but we also talk a bit about foraging. And foraging is something that you are just incredibly passionate about and knowledgeable of. And maybe you could just start there. Tell us a little bit about how you became a forager and
Yeah.
what made you decide to start sharing that wisdom with others?
So I started foraging as I feel like a lot of people who live in the Midwest or live anywhere that isn't extraordinarily urban do as a kid. I was very lucky that my mother loves plants, has an excellent green thumb. I didn't get that part. All of my gardens have to be like native plantings because the upkeep of taking care of things that are not from this area, I
This
don't know
makes me
how my
feel
mom
so
did
much better because, like, every one of my friends jokes that, like, I am, like, the worst gardener. They're like, "You're an embarrassment to a botanist." I'm like, "I'm not a horticulturalist. Like, I get
it.
stuff in the
Yes,
wild," you know? So thank
it's a
you. This
different
is
science and it's a
validating.
different art
Yes.
form. Like,
Yes.
put me in the middle of, a national forest, and I will point out all of the different
Mhm.
oaks and maples and beeches and everything, but if you handed me, like, a horticulturist's belt at a plant conservatory, I would be
No.
like, "Fire me. These plants are gonna die."
It's amazing. Well, like, this knowledge that you're talking about though is not trivial. Like knowing how to identify, not only all these different trees, but also, herbs and weeds that kind of pop up at different times of year. And not
Yeah.
only knowing how to identify them, but how to actually process them to take something that in some cases might be slightly poisonous and make it
Yep.
into a food is an amazing skill set. So
Oh.
maybe, yeah, tell us about that. Like, when you're going on a walk or in a foraging, exploration, like how do you go about learning these things? Like where do you start?
Yeah, and I get that question so often because it can seem really daunting, especially when you're like cracking open, say, one of like Sam Thayer's books, or I mean, someone just recently told me I was like scrolling through your page and there's just so much. Like, where does a person even begin? And I tell everyone you just have to start small.
Mhm,
With the advent of some of these apps like iNaturalist, which is like such a great citizen science
mhm.
tool, I'll tell a lot of people before you even think about putting plants into your mouth hole, how about you just go for a walk around your neighborhood and every time a plant stands out to you for some reason, take a second and ask yourself why it stands out. That's
Mhm.
one of my favorite things to do when I lead in-person plant walks is we'll usually start with one tree or shrub or plant, and I'll just go around the circle and ask everyone to name something that they see visually about that plant, kind of helping people turn off their plant blindness. Because it's very easy to point at something big and be like, that one's a tree, that middle sized one's a shrub, and that one on the ground is just a random plant. Done. Um, but it really, I think the first step in becoming a great forager is tuning your ability to pay attention to small details on plants. And maybe it's like, "Oh, I thought it was just a tree, but the leaves are pinnate and not everybody's like that." So boom, there you go, you notice something. Or this
Yeah.
bark is really smooth and gray and not everyone else's bark is like that. Boom, you noticed something. And then with the help of apps like iNaturalist, you can, use AI to then zero in on. I'd say it's usually pretty accurate to plant family. Once
Mhm.
you get any more intricate than that, I'm just like, please never rely on these apps to tell you what to eat. But for a lot of people, just zooming in on the plant family is huge, and it gives you a jumping off point to read up on a plant more. So this time of the year in my neck of the woods, dead nettle, purple dead nettle is coming up
Mhm.
everywhere. One of my favorite spring greens, mostly because it just means that plants are coming back to life. It's not the tastiest by itself. It is in like the broth that I'm sipping right now, though, so it's super
Nice.
tasty. And it's just like, okay, let's just like zero in and take a look at this plant that you just noticed because it's late winter, early spring, and there are these beautiful little pink and purple flowers on it. Let's just
Mhm.
take a look closer. So I tell people, I know it seems daunting. You just have to start small. And the biggest, most important tool in your tool belt is honestly just your ability to notice things.
Yeah. Well, this is why I always say, the best people to go for hikes with are botanists because we hike really slow. I
So
we have
slow.
we have, like, our own little yoga pose. I like to call it, like, it's like not downward dog, it's not quite child's pose, it's somewhere in
Yeah.
between, and we're, like, down with our little hand lens looking at something on the ground, it's like face down, bottom up, and we're like,
Yep.
"Oh, look at this plant." Yeah. So
I tell everybody, even if the place where we're going hiking seems kind of like a daunting trail, it's gonna be easy peasy because I am going to be stopping every 15 feet
yes.
to look at
That's it.
something.
That's it. And you learn so much hiking with friends. I mean, what
Yeah.
I tell my students to do is, if you really want to start learning, think about ways to join up with others through like native plant societies
Yes.
or like the local mushroom club.
Oh,
I
the
mean,
local
yeah.
mycological societies.
Yes.
Sometimes I think I am, like, paying very, very close attention to things, but when I see what our local mycological society brings back during forays, I'm just like, "You noticed that? Oh my god, I gotta start hiking even slower."
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, it's that careful power of observation that I think unfortunately isn't really taught in school. The
Yeah,
way, it's just everyone's a bit distracted. I mean, this is like the good and bad thing about social media. On one
yeah,
hand, you have the amazing power to reach so many and share an enthusiasm for something, but you also want them to get off the social media to actually go look at the plants themselves, right?
exactly. I mean, if it wouldn't probably make the apps mad at me, I'd be like, "Okay, this was a fun video. Put me down, go outside, touch grass,
Yes, yes, yes. No,
smell
I
a
mean,
dandelion, hug a tree, something. Get outside."
I know. It's funny, when I was growing up, being a tree hugger was like this. Oh, that's, a tree hugger? Oh, I love
Yes.
hugging trees. I always have. I'm like, let me climb and hug the trees. And so everywhere I travel, I like try and get like pictures of me hugging trees and like, because it's connecting with these other creatures. In some cases,
Yes.
some of these have been, on our planet for thousands of years, some of these really old trees. What's your favorite tree that you've ever hugged?
Oh my
I
gosh.
bet you have I bet you have some cool one.
I do. I literally just got goosebumps thinking about this tree because there is a metro park here in Columbus. It is the Blacklick Woods Metro Park for anyone who's local who's
Mhm.
listening. And it's kind of off the beaten path, but there is this like 400-year-old oak, like
Whoa.
one of the few trees in the area that never got raised for agriculture, that
Mm,
just sat on different people's property for long enough before the city ended up buying up the property to make a park like 70
nice.
years ago. And Like, it gives me chills to be in its presence because you're just aware of how much history that tree has lived through. I love giving that tree a hug, and I love thinking of all of the other people and animals that have also gone past and touched the tree over its lifetime.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it so much, and it really feels like this hidden gem in the
Yeah.
heart of the park because 'cause they're not loud and proud about it. You just kind of stumble on it, and they have one itty bitty little plaque in front of it,
Yeah.
being like a piece of Ohio history.
There it is, there it is. Well, I love that. You could I think all of us can find a special tree to connect with in our neighborhoods or in our towns, and yeah, I think that's a great way to get started with connecting to nature, just learning about the species in your neighborhood on your
Yeah.
walks. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
That has been something that I've been trying to have rub off on all of my neighbors in our neighborhood, and it's really sweet because now a lot of them are just like, "Oh, I know that all the trees in this little pocket park are bur oaks because you were out here in the fall with the squirrels gathering acorns." And I'm like, "Hey, whatever works."
That's awesome. So what do you do with the acorns? Do you make, acorn flour
I
to
do
eat?
make acorn
Oh,
flour, it's
tell
one of
us
my
about
favorites.
this because, acorns are so rich in tannins, and when I tell my students you can make flour, they're just like, "Well, how do you do that? All these tannins would not be good to eat," but, like, there's a way to get rid of the tannins. How do you
Yes.
process the acorns? Yeah.
So I'm a cold leaching girly. I like keeping the starches and the acorns
Mhm,
preserved because you never know what you're going to want to bake with them. Sometimes you want the starches intact, sometimes you don't.
mhm.
But while those tannins are amazing for keeping the acorns safe and secure until they find their way into the ground or into my forager's basket, thankfully those tannins are water soluble, which when
Yay.
you're an acorn sitting on the ground over winter, that's great, leaching out a lot of those tannins with all of the snowfall and winter rains. But for
Mhm.
us humans, that's also wonderful because it means you can grind up the acorns, kind of expose as much surface area as you can, and then have it sitting in cool water. You change the water every few hours. It'll be really dark and rich with those tannins at first and get progressively lighter as you go. I'm always like a taste test girly because sometimes the water will look very clear and the acorns will not taste the way you want flour to taste yet. And
Oh,
that's
no.
okay. I have learned that the hard way through several years of
Okay,
processing. Always
okay.
taste it before you put them in the dehydrator.
Nice.
And yeah, once it's done, you dry the moisture out of it. I will grind it super fine in I have 2 coffee grinders, one for my coffee, one for all of my flours and spices, and
Mhm.
then you go from there. You can also hot leach them, which is usually faster, but it takes so much more hands-on time.
Yeah, I'm a hands-off kinda girl too, so this
Yeah,
sounds good. I like the
yeah.
cold leaching. It still sounds very fancy. It's the cold leach, acorn flour. Nice, nice.
And there are
Well,
acorns everywhere, and I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, guys, like, there's literally food hidden everywhere, and odds are one of your ancestors at some point in time was chomping on acorns."
yeah. Well, let me put this into the context of, like, current kind of pop culture, right? So, we have this show on HBO that everybody's watching, The Last of Us, where you're kind
Yes.
of, right? Are you watching it too? Yeah, so, I mean,
I
I
have not been watching it because everyone's been yelling at me to watch it.
it's
All
like
I know is cordyceps were a very heavy influence, and that's where my knowledge stops.
well, it's like, end of the world, Ophiocordyceps takes over, humans, makes them zombies. I won't give away too much after that. But, they're living in this kind of post apocalyptic world. And what I find interesting is you don't really have people foraging, there's hunting happening. But it's like,
Okay.
why aren't people gathering the acorns?
Yeah,
Why aren't they looking for the spring greens? Like, they're
yeah.
just, eating these very old 20-year-old cans of like Campbell's soup and stuff. I'm like, no,
What? No.
what? No, stop, So I I've just always thought, wouldn't it be amazing if in shows like that, if we had more of this introduced? And, I wanna just let the audience know, you've had some experience on the screen. I saw you had a episode with Drew Barrymore, and you were
Yeah,
just, out foraging with Jimmy Kimmel, doing
yeah.
amazing things, and I'm sure there's lots of other things, so what has that experience been like? Because that's reaching a whole different audience, beyond what you've cultivated this amazing audience through social media. But what is it like to kind of work with both of those audiences, and do you think it can make an impact in getting people excited about foraging?
That is the goal. That is
Yeah,
absolutely the goal, and both of those experiences, one, it's still wild to me that either of them happened.
it's amazing.
I with Drew Barrymore, she's very loud and proud about her love of flowers, so I was like, "Okay,
Yes.
this makes perfect sense. We're gonna gather some violets."
Mhm.
Shout out to the producers of our segment who had to go in New York City, and I literally had to use iNaturalist on my phone and be like, "Okay, these areas seem like there would be a lot of violets this time
Oh
of
my
year."
goodness.
Just judging from everything else everyone is tagging and how grassy it is, I would go look there and they found them, thank goodness.
That's amazing. No, this brings a whole other level to your to the search. So, you're searching for these foods in the wild using programs like
Technology.
iNaturalist. Yeah, and then sending people. I love it. I love it.
So that was fantastic. And now every
Mhm.
time I visit my mom is just like, "Well, are you making me violet lemonade?" Drew got violet lemonade. And
Yeah, where's
am I
mine?
getting violet lemonade? And she did. I also brought some down for my mom for Mother's Day for the
Very
for the
nice.
last 2 years too. But both of those experiences were wild, and getting to talk to a group of people that I don't normally get to talk to.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's phenomenal. The segment with Drew was so well received. And then I saw all of these folks making violet lemonade or just doing experiments changing, shifting the pH of those
Mhm.
anthocyanins and shifting them
Yes.
blue with baking soda and shifting it, hot pink with lemon juice. And that was so cool to watch happen. I even watched someone who
Amazing.
made watercolor paints and made an entire painting just shifting the pH
No
of
way.
the
Oh,
pigments
wow.
from both grape hyacinths, which will do the same thing, and
Mhm.
violets, and I was like, "This is the coolest thing that I've ever been able to take, like, 1% of credit for."
No, it's amazing. Well, that's it. It's about showing and getting people excited, and then, like, to the point
Yeah,
where they're actually trying it at home. That's awesome.
exactly, and
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of my videos, I understand, are things that not everybody is going to do. Not everyone is going to go, like, digging in the silt of the the Mississippi River floodplain to gather Wapato. I get that. Not everybody likes being waist deep in a bog like I do. Some things we just have to save for us, like field botanists, and that's fine.
It's fair.
But
Fair
I
point.
also
Okay.
love getting to do things like dandelion flower fritters, an easy
Mm.
one that anybody can be doing in the springtime, and making it seem more accessible because when I was growing up, I learned a lot about wild plants from my mom and from
Mhm.
her mom. But whenever I saw foraging kind of in book form or in pop culture, it
The
was
old white
always very
guy.
rugged,
Yeah.
extreme, and that, even as a person who's loved foraging from a really young age, honestly made me feel like I couldn't call myself a forager. I'm just like, "No, I'm just making soup from the plants in my front yard," like how kids play potions. I'm not living off the grid for
Yeah.
30 days at a time or, pulling a Rob Greenfield and only eating the things that I grow, forage, and barter for a year of my life.
Whoa.
Because that can make it seem really unattainable and can almost
Yeah.
turn people off because 'cause they'll be like, I never even
Too
wanna do
much.
that, so I'm not gonna
Yeah.
try." So I was so thankful for some of these TV segments for showing just how easy and fun it can
Mhm.
be. The Jimmy Kimmel segment was just a blast, and
It was
now I
so much
keep
fun
a
to
tiny hot
watch.
sauce in my foraging basket because Guillermo brought hot sauce, and hot sauce on mallow leaves is so good. It's so good.
Oh, that's
Perfect.
amazing. That's
Um,
great.
yeah, so I've been really thankful to get to reach so many new brains and show them that you don't have to be in the middle of the woods to forage. Anybody can do it anywhere. And you don't have to, the goal doesn't need to be living off of it. The goal can just be supplementing what you already have. And more importantly, fostering a connection with the spaces around you. I think that's so much more important than like, I gathered 50% of the calories I ate this week. I, that's just not attainable for most people. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I love this idea of making a connection with your foods because I feel like we're so disconnected today. We're
yes.
disconnected from the land, we're disconnected from each other. We had a recent segment where we spoke about, eating together and how important that is actually to our mental
Yeah,
health to actually just eat together.
just
But I
be
can tell
together.
you, when I'm out looking at plants, I'm happy. I don't know what it
Yeah.
is. Like it's not, just my botany geekdom coming out. Like, but especially if I can make something from those plants, if I'm making medicine or I'm making some sort of food. I've never understood why people go to such lengths to kill other dandelions. I'm like, no, don't spray them. I want to gather those.
Yes,
Make a great
exactly. Just
soup,
give them to me
give
if
them
you're
to me.
not
Don't
going to use them.
you know it's so I think it's like it's not just about seeing nature for the first time, it's about building that this nature is meaningful to me
Yeah,
because this nourishes my body or this heals my
yeah,
wounds, or it's that other level, and I think people are hungry for that, and like what
yes.
you do gives them inspiration of like, oh, this is attainable. I don't have to be, Bear Grylls off in the in the wilderness, just like, I mean, I
Exactly.
I I think it's amazing if you can do that, but like you said, you can also just explore the wild foods in your neighborhood as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think people are so hungry for feeling connection, whether that's connection to their neighbors or their family members, or just like the space that they occupy in the world. A lot of times people will ask me in the comments of my videos, why do you seem so happy all the time? And I was just like, well, I'm not, but I am happy while I'm doing this.
That's right.
So, there's something to it. There's something to just, like, spending time in the fresh air, getting your hands a little dirty, and the pride that I feel in making something with the
Mhm.
plants that I find. It's been unseasonably warm in on our half of the country this year,
Yes.
and it was so fun this morning being like, "Ah, ha, 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 ha. I'm gathering my daylily shoots because it's that season and I'm gonna put these into my soup. I'm so excited." And everything else in the soup was also foraged. But even if it wasn't, I still feel like I would have felt really excited about the soup more so than I would from just a can
Yeah.
because I got to play
Well,
a little role
you
in it.
got to and you got to pay attention to the seasons. I think a
Yeah.
lot about climate change denialism and how can people not understand? And I'm like, well, of course they don't understand. They don't understand the cycles of our foods, the
Yep.
cycles of our seasons, and how how those larger climatic shifts affect when things flower, when they fruit, when
Yeah.
you have, more abundant wild game. I mean, there's like, it's like all the effects on animals and plants is because they're not even looking at that at
No, they're
all.
not tuned
Because,
into it.
yeah, we can get tomatoes any day of the
Any time
year
of the
in the
year.
store,
Yeah.
which is insane. 100 years ago would not have been possible, at all. So,
And a
yeah.
pro tip from a person who does a lot of cooking for everyone who's listening. Yes, you can buy a tomato this time of year. Don't. Please just get canned tomatoes during the winter. At least those tomatoes were picked at peak season. The flavor
Hmm.
is going to be so much better than what you are going to get out of a fresh tomato this time of year. I beg of you. Let the
Yeah.
winter and the spring be your canned tomato times. Maybe even grow your own tomatoes and then can them so you can use them
Yes.
during the winter if you have the space and the ability, because that's always the absolute best. But
Yeah.
we live in this era where everything is available all the time. It's not like markets even 60, 70 years ago where there was a really specific time for
Hmm.
plants, asparagus would be in the early
Yep.
spring because it's before the asparagus would get too big and woody and frondy for everyone to
Mhm.
be eating. You would our even I don't want to say our ancestors because it was just like 2 generations ago
Yeah, yeah.
were so much better connected to I like calling them like micro seasons. All of these little things like, oh, well, it's about time for this because this happened. It's about time for
Mhm.
this because this happened. And one of the things I tell people foraging, one of the greatest gifts it'll give you is that awareness of like, ah, yeah, the dead nettle's flowering, which means the shoots of the daylilies are coming up, which means I bet you in a week, if I go to the woods, the first of the little ramp babies are going to be coming up with some of the other spring ephemerals. It
Yeah.
it's
But
so beautiful and it
it's
makes you feel a part of something so much bigger than yourself.
because you are in that
Yeah,
context. I mean, it is really magical. It's funny because as an ethnobotanist, I study this in different cultures, and I'm totally an outsider because I'm like looking at like, whoa, that the wild oregano, which is by the way this amazingly fragrant oregano, grows on these rocky outcrops around the time you cut the grain. And I'm like, and I go out and then, oh, and while you're there, you're able to pick all the land snails. And you have this amazing, like, tomato and land snail kind of stew that you make. So it's
yeah.
all these things that we're documenting as ethnobotanists in other cultures that has largely disappeared from our own. But there were some things when I was a kid that I learned from my dad, and I want to see
Ooh,
if
like
you've if
what?
you've I want
Please
to see if you
tell.
know of these. So there's one thing called swamp cabbage, which is a very Florida, like Central Florida thing. It's the heart of palm of a kind of palm, and you
Yeah.
cook this with. I mean, it's not all forage. You're throwing in bacon and milk and butter and salt and pepper, and it's just
Yeah.
brewing in this big stew. And you can't buy it anywhere. It's just like something you find at like big family barbecues.
Yes.
Have you ever seen anything like that? This kind of swamp cabbage before?
I mean, first of all, that sounds amazing. Granted, I can't have a lot of the things that are in it, but it sounds
Maybe do without
delicious.
without without the pork, without the milk and dairy. It'd be great, right?
It it reminds me a lot of collard greens. I mean, my
Mhm.
dad's family is from the Gulf Coast in Mississippi,
Yes.
and so collard greens and a lot of the other greens that much more regularly up until the last, 50 or so years were also used in place of them, be it turnip greens
Mhm.
or poke salad. That was one of the plants that I learned from my dad's side of the family. Huge staple in so much Southern cuisine that very much has fallen by the wayside outside of a few pockets of like indigenous culture and
Mhm.
Southern Black culture. And with poke salad, oh my gosh, now
Well,
I
now
do
we're
prepare
getting
it
to
the
the
way that
time
I
for it.
prepare greens, where it's like you're making this
Yeah.
whole fragrant broth and it has to simmer for hours and hours and hours after boiling and draining the poke shoots
Yeah.
at least
Boil
twice.
and throw.
Yes.
Yes.
Then you can throw them in and start building all of your flavors. And,
Yeah.
growing up, it was, whatever piece of pork you had left over thrown in and letting the fat
Mhm.
render and throwing your aromatics in with it and then adding in all of your greens. And now it's usually me like, okay, well, I can't have bacon, so I'm throwing in some dulse seaweed that I gathered in Maine and letting that
Nice.
crisp up and brown in oil and then adding in the like nodding onion flowers that I had dried or this time of
Mm.
year. I'm like, allium, vanilla. That is crow's garlic, onion grass. It has too many names.
Nice. But nice and allium-ish. I
Yes,
like that, yes.
exactly. Every my favorite weed. Uh, Usually very good at spreading. We don't have a lot left of it in our yard anymore because we keep eating it.
That's
And
great. That's great.
yeah, so thing dishes like that, I mean, poke for some people it used to be such a big deal. You used to even be able to buy it canned until like
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago.
Mhm.
Which
Yeah.
I was shook that you could even buy it for that long. I did not know that canned poke salad, like, very much made it into the 21st century, barely. and now
Yeah,
has kind of disappeared off the map unless you are friends with foragers.
there you go. Well, for those that are wanting to look up what poke is, it's Phytolacca americana.
Yeah.
You have to get it when it's super young, right?
Yeah, you gotta get
If it
those
gets older,
meristem shoots. It still has to
yeah,
be meristematic, and
meristematic.
that is hard to articulate.
Tricky. Mm. Yeah, but you must collect the meristematic. Yeah, I could see how that's hard to get across on a
I'm
show.
like, "Ooh, that's hard to articulate to someone who didn't have to sit in a botany class." Oh, no.
Yeah, yeah. But it's one of those survival foods that's just amazing because it's poisonous. You have
Yep,
to boil it, throw out the water 3 times
yep,
because the toxic compounds found in the meristem tissue is actually those are heat labile, so you can get rid of it.
yep.
But if the plant gets big with all the fruits and flowers, definitely poison. Stay
Absolutely
away.
poisonous.
Yeah,
Bad
yeah.
news bears.
But if you know how to use it, I mean, that's what's so fascinating to me is how, cultures across the world have taken things that are otherwise toxic, but they know, oh, I can eat this part at this time of year if
Yeah.
I prepare it this way. I mean, that's how potatoes started too. I mean, our original
Yes.
potatoes were super toxic, you
Yep.
know?
Yep.
Yeah.
And things like taro. And
Yes.
oh my gosh, I can't imagine being the person who was like, "Ah, yes, this is how we will get rid of that, like, I just ate broken glass feeling and turn this into a delicious cash crop."
Yeah. That must have taken quite a bit of innovation and generations of innovators to get to, I would
Generations of
imagine.
innovation and
Yeah.
breeding for plants that
Mhm.
have less of those, oh gosh, they're calcium oxalate, crystals in them that just
Crystals.
the
Hmm.
not
Yeah.
fun. The
Those are
same
the
reason why you
same.
don't wanna eat skunk cabbage.
Yeah, skunk cabbage or have your pets eat a lot of house plants have
Yeah,
those crystals. Yeah, yeah, it's like a very good plant defense. That's why they
it
make
is.
it.
And
Yeah,
when and every time I'm just like, "Don't get mad at the plants, they're just really good at their job."
exactly. Exactly. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, while I want to make sure we get to the science communication questions I
Yes,
have too before we get too far because I could literally talk to you for days and days and days about all these cool things that you can forage. But we're going to come back to some foraging recipes at the very end because I know you've got something cool you can share with the audience. Yay! So this is a question I know so many scientists are probably dying to ask you, and it is because there are a lot of us that are interested in science communication. Science communication takes many forms, as you know, whether it's audio or written or video or, illustration. Um, and many of us have tried, and I have a group of friends, and we talk about like how do we become better science communicators. We try and have failed. I mean, I'm a big failure at some of my social media channels like Instagram,
okay,
Facebook.
okay, but you wrote an
I
entire
cannot work
book.
I know, but I cannot work that algorithm to save my life, which is like a good thing my life's not dependent on the Facebook algorithm. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe this isn't the right one for me. But I think each of us has strengths in different areas. And what you've really demonstrated is the ability to tap into an entire generation of young people that are curious about nature. How did you determine which platform to go with? I mean, or even which format, long form, short form,
Yeah.
video, written, like, how did you come to that? Did you have special training, and what advice can you get? I mean, I'm asking all the questions at once, I'm sorry, which is like
Yeah,
that that
have a
podcast
single
host
question
here.
go, I'm
I'm like,
ready, I'm
tell
excited.
me, tell me, how do you do it all? No, but let's start with this. How do you decide on what format is a best fit for you, and what advice can you give to people?
Yeah, absolutely. I contrary to what some folks might believe, if you have only followed me in the last couple of years, my first go at talking about foraging was not cute, quippy, 60-second long videos. If you scroll far back enough on my Instagram, you'll see for the first year and change, it was like long form essays and
Mhm.
hyper contrasted DSLR photography of the
Lovely
plants
photographers.
and the food I was making from them, lots of overhead Bon Appetit style food shots. And
Nice.
I built up like a decent core following. I had a couple thousand followers after a year or so of just doing that. And as a person who has been told a lot from a very young age that I am very loud and often a little much for people, especially getting into like a collegiate science community and just being like, ah, why aren't all of the other engineers as talkative as me? Oh, this is just like not a thing that's as valued in the academic science community. Cool, 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 cool. Fine, awesome, great. So when I was going into trying to share this information and document it for myself, I was like, oh, people don't want me to talk. I'm just gonna write out everything, and that'll be
Mhm.
great. And I got a small platform, but it plateaued around a couple thousand followers.
Mhm. That's me right now on Facebook.
Well, then hopefully the next part of the story will give you hope and maybe some pointers.
Yes.
At the time, I was, kind of doing my foraging blogging, and I had stumbled, fell into a social media marketing job.
Ooh.
Um, I have always loved compiling real life data and then using that to inform communication decisions. Being in college, very much torn between my love of theater and the performance arts and writing, but then also my love of science.
Mhm.
Uh, the way that I the way that I thought I had perfectly settled those two halves of my brain was like, oh, well, I'm working for this quirky company and we make these funny memes that also secretly make people want to buy our products. And every week I get to go and I gather all of my data about each of the posts from last week. And then I get to go and put them into my spreadsheet and look at the percentage changes of everything and then use those numbers to justify future decisions that we were making on
Mm.
that page. Testing something in a small capacity on Twitter and then knowing, oh, this joke played really well on Twitter. I'm going to use that joke to inform a short video that we put on Instagram. And then that video does really well.
Nice. It's very scientific. This is like
Yeah,
experimental data and then analysis and then wow, optimization. Okay, I can get behind this
exactly. I
idea.
was
Okay.
just applying the scientific method to
Yeah,
Instagram, essentially.
amazing. Yeah.
And it was 2019. I think I'm allowed to say this. I worked for BarkBox, and so it had a very large and looming population. I'm just using science terms now. Followers on Instagram and Facebook, and we knew that TikTok was going to be the next big thing.
Mhm.
So my boss, who was solidly in her 30s by then, had decided I don't need to figure this out. I was the one who figured out how we made it work on Facebook and Instagram. Go, child, because I was young and still in my 20s then. You go figure out how TikTok works. So I made myself a personal account and I honestly just started throwing spaghetti at the wall. I was like, oh my God, this place has everything. I'm going to do a silly dance. That didn't work. Okay. I'm going to show what I eat in the day. Okay. That didn't work. Cool. I was just testing everything that I could think of except for foraging. I was like, nope, got to keep that separate. The children don't want nature. The children want giant red space boots. Sorry, those guys have been all over my newsfeed for the last week. And just one day on a whim, shortly after the world shut down in early 2020,
Mhm.
I made a video for my own personal page and was like, hey, are you terrified of going to the grocery store? Me too, for more reasons than just my acute anxiety disorder. Here are 5 plants I know are growing in your neighborhood, regardless of where you live, that you can eat to stretch out your groceries back when we thought we'd only be inside for 2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was extremely basic. It was like garlic mustard, or if you have it in your area, black mustard. It was
Mhm.
dandelions, it was violets, it was onion grass, and that video took off.
Wow. I mean, that's it. You're hitting the exact moment with the kind of information people were desperate for. I
Yeah.
mean, really. I mean, I remember this is a time when I'm like, I would get like grocery delivery after a while. I mean, we lived on a bag of potatoes and some like gourds for a long time and beans in
Yup.
our house. But then it's like,
Yup.
the Clorox wipes to every surface. It's like,
Oh my
wiping
god,
down
the
the surface of the
spraying down
banana.
of the
Can
bag
I
of
can I
chips when
like
it arrives.
yes, all of that. It's like, no, okay. So I see. So it's a scientific method. It's really being well attuned to what you're going through, what you
Yeah.
needed to do, and then sharing that. Yeah,
I think it was
amazing.
just, yeah, recognizing a moment that everyone was going through together and
Hmm.
just honestly sharing what I was doing to
Yeah.
cope. And I do notice myself doing this, and it's something that I think happens a lot in SciComm where we sometimes forget that the people we're talking to have not sat in the same classes that we have sat in, and they
Yeah. That's it. That's
haven't.
it. Definitely difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, they
Meristemic
don't have
tissue.
all the
Okay.
same language
Yeah.
that we necessarily do to communicate, but they are still smart. So it's walking this
Yes.
line between not talking down to
Hmm.
anybody, just talking to everyone like I would talk to a friend,
Yeah.
but then also making sure that it's a friend who has like not sat in a great deal of plant science classes. And when I'm able to thread that needle well, that is when I tend to find my content doing really well, or when it can relate to a real life thing, as if foraging isn't real life. I just did a video on throat coat tea, and I was like, yeah, the secret
Yes.
is slippery elm. But if you have one of these weedy Siberian elms like I do, and they send out a million shoots, the chunkiness of a baby's wrist every year, you can actually make your own throat coat tea. I'm gonna show you how. It's just
Amazing.
finding all of these unexpected ways that people can recognize something in a world where they didn't think they would recognize anything. And I've seen a lot of people doing so well with this, like Astro Katie, in terms of all things space and astrophysics. I'm just
Hmm.
like, physics is where I tap out 9 times out of 10. Physics is the reason why I did not get an engineering degree, while that is what I started off as. We got to physics, and I was like, no, none of this, actually. But when a great science communicator is explaining those concepts to you, not only do they make sense, but they get you excited about them.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's such great advice and so well said. I mean, you're right. I don't really understand physics, but there are these science communicators that write these books or have, various platforms can get those messages across. And it's about real connections. What I love about your
yeah.
videos is I know like this is the real you. This is you living your life and giving us a glimpse inside, like, what you're dealing with in your garden. Like these suckers are in my way. I'm
Yep.
gonna chop them up and make my throat coat tea. You know, it's amazing.
Someone once asked me if it was like a pretty early interview. I definitely still had under a million followers on TikTok, and they asked if it was like an act, if I was just playing a character. And I remember being like, "Do you think that if I had a say in the matter, this is the person I would choose to be playing? I am a very loud nerd. Don't you
That-
think I would choose someone cooler to be? Come on now."
well,
I laugh about that.
you're a nerd that's inspiring so many, Alexis.
Oh, I'm
And
sorry.
I'm so excited, by the way, for all the listeners. I know I've been telling you guys about this really cool conference coming up in June. It's the
Yes,
joint conference of the Society for Economic Botany and Society of Ethnobiology. And I am so excited because Alexis is going to be there
I can't
and
wait.
I know,
I
and
can't
I
wait.
know at some point we're going to have to sneak away to the park and do some foraging. Yes,
Yes, please. My sister lives
yes.
in Atlanta, and I also have her scouting. I'm just like,
Nice.
Tell me where I'm going when I am there to forage, please. Thank
Yay.
you."
Well, and you'll be happy to know too, our mutual friend Linda Black Elk is going to be here, and,
Yes!
she's doing a workshop on foraging right before your SciComm, so I think I'm gonna, like, totally I mean, I'm gonna be handling so many, like, last minute things, chairing the committee, but
Casual.
I'm gonna be definitely sneaking away to both of your, sessions
No,
because that's
I
my
will
happy
send you
place.
the PowerPoint presentation. I don't wanna
Yeah.
put another thing on your plate
No, no.
at least.
You'll just find me laying down in the grass in the forest, very happy, like munching on some dandelion. I'll be that's
I
that's where I'll
am
escape to.
I love these types of conferences and gatherings. I'm always just like, "I wish I could be everywhere at once, though." Nothing is
Yeah.
worse than other really cool things happening while you're teaching, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
"No! Split me
No,
in
it's a
2. I wanna be in both places at the same time."
yes, yes. Well,
No, but it's gonna be amazing,
we are
and
going to be
Robin Wall Kimmerer is gonna
recording.
be
Robin
here.
Wall Kimmer is our opening speaker.
I
We
can't
have
wait to cry at her.
yes. I need to get her some, like, bodyguards just to keep me and my friends away because 'cause we're
Yep,
just gonna be like,
exactly.
"Bestow your wisdom." Yeah, we've got Robin and oh my gosh, and, I don't know if I told you this, but, another good friend, Chef Sean Sherman is
Yes.
also going to be there.
I
So
love
yeah,
Sean so much.
he's he's great. He cooked our banquet feast back at our last meeting in Madison, and
Really?
but this time I'm not gonna have him, like, cooking. He's just gonna come and talk and enjoy and, like, it'll
Ano
be it'll
Another
be great.
shameless plug on here. If you are a
I
person
know.
listening and you live in the Minneapolis area and you haven't
Mhm.
gone to a Womni yet,
You gotta go.
it's it's fine. I forgive you, but, like, you should make your reservation now.
Yes.
All the foods are everything on the menu is 100% indigenous to the Americas, which is, like,
Does any other restaurant even do
mind-blowing.
that in the US? I don't know that there is. Like, are there other restaurants that do I mean,
Not
it's
that I know of, but,
so
like,
that are, like, fully
everything.
indigenous. Yeah, it's amazing. I
It's
haven't been yet. I
amazing.
need to make a flight up there just to go. I do.
Any
It's like
Name the time, and I will be on a flight
here
so
we go.
fast.
Just popping up to,
Just a little
Minneapolis
hi,
for
just
dinner, just a
stopping
little
by.
no, it's amazing. I've heard so many great things about it. Well, on the topic of food, because I know we're almost out of time, um, what kind of recipe might you share with us, before we go?
Ooh, ooh. Okay, so, if we want to go very, very basic and also very quintessentially, Ohio, it is spring tonic season. Spring
Mm,
tonics take a lot of different forms, but the general idea was, we're coming out of this long winter. It is time to stop living off of our larder and reinvigorate our body with all of these, like, fresh leafy greens and all of the vitamins and minerals they have. And for some cool people, like some of my grandparents, that entails just taking all the first edible greens that come up and putting them into a high proof alcohol and letting them sit for a couple of weeks and then putting a couple drops in your water every day, every time you have a
nice.
glass of water. But spring tonics can also be things like a nice spring soup. One of my
Mm,
favorite spring tonics this time of year, since our neighborhood is rife with dandelion greens, dead nettle greens, and with onion grass, that allium
mm.
vinale. I never know whether to say the E at the end or not, and I've heard it pronounced so many different ways.
Let's just I have no idea. I don't know on
No,
that
I
one.
was just like,
It's like
that one, the one that's everywhere and isn't native.
and the one that tastes good. Yep.
Yep, and the one that tastes amazing. Linda Black Elk makes an amazing kimchi out of it. That
Yum.
can be a recipe that she shares. But
Yes.
I love just making a spring tonic soup, taking a neutral oil, sauteing my onion grass greens in it to get them all nice and fragrant, and then throwing in just as many dead nettle greens and dandelion greens. And honestly, in my front yard, some of our prickly lettuce already has their little rosettes as well. So taking some of those really tender prickly lettuce leaves, throwing them in
Nice.
with your aromatics, adding a little bit of broth. Um, During the winter, I make mushroom broths all the time, so throwing in whatever extra broth you have left, blending it all up if you want it to be nice and smooth, and you have like this delicious spring tonic of a soup. And it's so versatile. You can just kind of amend it to whatever is coming up in your neighborhood and then salt and pepper it accordingly.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Yummy. Okay, spring tonic soup it is. I'll have to add that to our menu this week at home. Well, thanks so much, Alexis, for coming on the show. This has been so much fun, and I
This
can't
has
wait to
been
see
so
you
much
this
fun. I want
June.
to just keep
Yes.
chatting. I'm like, yeah, we're just
I
friends
know.
having a little catch up chat.
I know, it's great. It's great. Well, for all the listeners, again, if you want to catch Alexis at this great upcoming conference, you can register. We have in-person and virtual options. And Alexis, do you have any other news to share? Where can they find you online? If you
Ooh,
haven't seen her TikTok, definitely check that out. Where can we send them?
if you are on TikTok, I am at Alexis Nikole, and that is Nikole. Thank you, mom. Uh, she's Kim with a Y. She had to give me an odd letter thrown in there. I appreciate it. It is not Black Forager like it is everywhere else because I didn't think people wanted me to make foraging content when I made my TikTok. And I simply haven't changed my name. Everywhere else that there can be content, though, you can find me as at Black Forager. Because back when I first started them and it was just essays and photography, I wanted
Hmm.
people to know a Black person was making that content because we forage too.
Nice. So important. Representation,
Yes.
excitement, communication. You got it all going on, Alexis. I
Oh,
can't wait to see you. Well, thanks so
I
much
know.
for
I
coming on
can't
the
wait to
show.
see you in
Yeah.
person at long last.
Yay. Awesome. Well, foodies, you've been listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious. This has been recorded on Restream. I want to thank our producers, to Rob Cohen and Christine Roth, for helping us develop a great show each and every week, bringing that content to you. We do the show with no commercials, and that means that we rely on you, our dear listeners, to help us keep it going. So if you'd like to support us, you can do that just by buying me a coffee. You can do that at buymeacoffee.com/foodiepharma. You can also pick up some cool merchandise at mysterycontrol.com and just look under the Foodie Pharma list. Thanks so much for listening. Stay healthy out there, and we'll see you next time.